destination. Curing the economy with casinos? In the first year, the sports lottery is estimated to generate $55 million in additional revenue. Additionally, with corporate and income tax increases, program and benefit cuts, and an across-the-board payroll reduction of 8%, Markell told lawmakers his plan would balance next year's budget despite a $751 million revenue hole. Now, before we look at the comprehensive annual financial report, which is the full accounting of all the money that Delaware has, this is just one example of the simplistic graphs that are presented to the public. A citizen's guide to the budget. Here we have the fiscal year 2009 General Fund operating budget, tax in, tax out. And in the putting it into perspective graph, the final challenge, we have a nice little snake with little dots showing us how that works. Now, after all of that, let's look at the 2009 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report for Delaware for the year ended June 30th, 2009. We won't go through the whole report in this case. However, one page, just one page in this report says it all. On page 29 of 192 pages is the section called Statewide Financial Analysis. It states that, as noted earlier, net assets may serve over time as a useful indicator of a government's financial position. This is referring to all of the investments and holdings that the Delaware state government has been holding for many, many years. It then says that the state's assets exceeded its liabilities by $5,204 million at the close of the most recent fiscal year. I'll say that again. The state's assets exceeded its liabilities by $5,204 million at the close of the most recent fiscal year. These are the investments that are not talked about on the budget report. Again, we are looking at the comprehensive, meaning full, everything, all assets and holdings. The state's assets exceeded its liabilities by $5,204 million. It then goes on to state that the largest portion of the state's net assets, 84.4%, reflects its investment in capital assets. For example, land, buildings, vehicles, and equipment, less any related outstanding debt used to acquire those assets. And at last, it states restricted net assets, comprising 7.5% of total net assets, represents resources that are subject to external restrictions, constitutional provisions, or enabling legislation on how they can be used. In other words, it's monies invested that cannot be liquidated. The remaining portion, unrestricted net assets at 8.1%, may be used at the state's discretion. However, some of these funds have been appropriated based on state statutes. Now, to translate this, unrestricted net assets that may be used at the state's discretion for whatever the state wants to use it for is 8.1% of $5.2 billion. Now, since I'm sure you don't have a calculator handy, 8.1% of $5,204,700,000 is $421,580,000, which may be used at the state's discretion. Well, that certainly seems to be enough to pay the $84 million budget gap for fiscal year 2009 as reported on the Delaware state budget. So instead of using this excess $421 million, which is only 8% of total assets for fiscal year 2009 in Delaware, The governor's recommendation for the incoming governor is to trim education by another $36.4 million, plus a 3% cut to higher education, plus an 8% pay cut for state employees and the raising of taxes for residents who make more than $60,000 a year. This is the criminal extortion racket called government. This is just one example of hidden assets and expendable monies that are being used for shareholder profit instead of the fiscally responsible actions of supporting the populace of the state of Delaware. But you must remember that this is only the comprehensive annual financial report for the state government of Delaware. This does not include the hundreds or thousands of individual city, county, school district, pension fund, and other governments within the state of Delaware, which all have their own individual comprehensive annual financial reports showing other billions of dollars in investments and other assets. And you ain't seen nothing yet. Let's go on to some other CAFRs from around the country. Moving further south, and still looking at the Sunshine Review, we see here the Florida state budget. It states that Florida state analysts estimate that the state faces a budget deficit for 2011 and 2012 of approximately $2.5 billion, which is down considerably from previous forecast of a $6 to $8 billion shortfall. The Florida State Legislature passed the fiscal year 2011 Florida State budget on April 30th, 2010, the deadline for doing so. The fiscal year 2011 budget is $4 billion larger than the prior year's state budget. $4 billion larger in 1 year. The Florida legislature struggled to plug a revenue shortfall of $3.2 billion. The budget leaves $1.4 billion in reserves. That's it, just $1.4 billion. The budget includes an increase in tobacco taxes, $1 per pack of cigarettes, and $900 million by expanding gambling. There seems to be a gambling theme as a way to fix economies. Forget producing anything, let's just have casinos. Under budget status for 2008-2009, it states as early as November of 2006, Florida had the second most foreclosures in the country, with 95,862 homes foreclosed upon in just the third quarter of that year. The Florida foreclosure rate remains 1 in 214 homes. In addition to the far-reaching effects of the mortgage crisis, Florida faces long-term budget problems as a result of a decline in its major economic engines, building, migration, and tourism, which have all declined. State revenue has declined for 3 years in a row, and the new fiscal year beginning July 1, 2009, could be the fourth. With the fall in property taxes, school districts remain underfunded. Also, Florida does not have an income tax. It relies heavily on sales tax, corporate tax, and real estate transaction taxes, which have all declined. Perhaps that's because all of the corporations moved to Delaware. Florida has a thing called the 2008 Deficit Elimination Package. The plan included increases in traffic fines of $10 for every traffic ticket issued except for speeding tickets, which went up by $25, and an elimination of 18% discount tickets for those enrolled in driver improvement courses. A suspension in the Environmental Land Program, saving $4 million and canceling $250 million in bond sales. A 10.5% cut in Medicaid payments to nursing homes, and a tax increase on nursing homes. A transfer of $400 million from a rainy day fund, leaving about $250 million in the fund. a $466 million cut in education spending, an option for school administrators to volunteer for pay cuts, and limiting the severance of teachers and administrations to 1 year. A 2% decrease in teachers' bonuses, saving the state $11 million. A 4% cut in aid to state universities and community colleges for a savings of $157 million. $700 million to be borrowed from a $1.2 billion endowment that invests money from tobacco settlements for future use on health care programs. A $9.9 million cut in the state public-private tourism agency, Visit Florida. A 5% cut in a program that helps people with developmental disabilities, including autism. But I'll bet they're still supporting vaccines. A $190 million cut in a program that helps pay for low and moderate income housing. An elimination of 1,400 state jobs, and a $3.7 million decrease in funding for cancer, cardiovascular, stroke, and pulmonary diseases. Yet not one mention of wasteful government spending. The Honorable Charlie Crist, the governor of Florida, in his policy and budget recommendations for fiscal year 2010 and 11, had these budget highlights: keeping Florida's economy vibrant, investing in Florida's workforce and infrastructure, continuing Florida's educational excellence, strengthening Florida's families, keeping Floridians healthy, preserving Florida's natural resources for generations to come, and protecting communities and preserving peace of mind. Now, how do you keep Florida's economy vibrant when you're laying off state workers? How do you invest in Florida's workforce and infrastructure when you're selling it off? How do you continue Florida's educational excellence when you're cutting off school funds? How do you strengthen Florida's families and keep Floridians healthy when you're cutting off Medicare payments and research for cancer and cardiovascular diseases? And how do you protect communities and preserve peace of mind when you are robbing your constituents blind with your hidden wealth and investments? Now, this is quite reminiscent of Barack Obama's Hope and Change campaign. But you cannot legislate hope, and you cannot hope for change without a representative government. Now, in Florida's case, I decided to pull up not the actual comprehensive annual financial report, which would have just told you how much money it actually had, but in this case, Florida is one of the exceptional states that actually lists out its investment holdings in a long list. So, starting at page 1 of 1,479 pages of assets and investments held by the Florida state government, as listed in the Florida 2009 State Investment Holdings Report, the first page states, per the PFIA legislation, only publicly traded securities are included in this report. Privately held securities are not. So the following are just the investments that the state of Florida, the one individual government called the Florida State Government, with its own individual CAFR, these are its investments in publicly traded companies. Now, I'm just going to go through pages of investments and read you some of the companies that you might recognize. Starting on page 101, we see that as of June 30th, 2010, the corporate government of the state of Florida owns $558,771,266 worth of Johnson & Johnson stock. Here they have AT&T stock, $504.5 million. Here's Apple Computers, or Apple Incorporated, at $773.8 million in stock investments. Here's one that'll blow your mind. This is in the cash and temporary holdings category. Listed under Other, this is cash holdings, and it is listed at $6.6 $8.7 billion. That right there is enough to pay off the budget crisis that Florida states that it has, just with this extra little bit of cash that it lists in its comprehensive annual financial report, the state investment holdings for 2009. Not to mention all these other investments that are scattered throughout these 1,479 pages. Also in cash and temporary, we have holdings in Japan. It doesn't really list what it is, it just says it's $39 million. Maybe it's yen. Back to stock investments, we have Abbott Laboratories, which is a pharmaceutical, at $210.8 million. For you World of Warcraft fans, Florida holds $17 million in stock investments in Activision and Blizzard, the company that makes your favorite game. Isn't it ironic that the very regulatory body that's supposed to rate video games for violence is the same government that has massive investments in the video game industry? Here's Adidas, the shoe and clothing company out of Germany, at $68.5 million. Advanced Auto Parts, an automotive retail chain, at $22.6 billion. How about Aetna? Managed healthcare at $49,685,000. African Bank investments in South Africa, $16.3 million. Hey, why not? Gotta diversify, huh? Are you starting to understand that just a small amount of the money that governments have invested in corporations and foreign corporations could easily pay off the entire country's debt, let alone the state of Florida's? Here's a big one. Here's the Sony Corporation, listed under electronic appliances, at $29.4 million. Sprint Nextel, wireless telecommunications services, at $34.4 million. St. Jude Medical, a healthcare equipment provider, at $35.7 million. Staples Incorporated, specialty stores, at $65.6 million. Stanley Black & Decker household appliances at $24.8 million. State Street Corporation, listed as asset management and custody banks, at $55 million. Here's the State Bank of India, for a total of $18.5 million. Suzuki Motor Company, land transportation, at $20.2 million. Swatch Group, the famous watchmakers of Switzerland, $21.7 million. Now you can see how strongly vested the state of Florida is in just about every possible industry and sub-industry in existence. I mean, look at these lists. Most of these are in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and a lot of them are in the millions. We even saw some that are in the billions. This is the money that the government called the state of Florida, the corporation acting as the government of Florida, has been earning off the taxpayer money it collects from you, invests, and then never gives you, the taxpayer, any of the profits. There's Target, general merchandise store, listed at over $114 million. There's Texas Instruments, listed as semiconductors, at $94.8 million. Verizon Communications, integrated telecommunications services, again at $261 million worth of stock investments. Now again, this is only the state government of Florida. This does not include each individual government within the state who has its own comprehensive annual financial report showing all of these types of investments. And may I just say, David Walker should be arrested right now for treason against the American people. Right now. Now remember, these are all publicly traded companies, and this list is not including private companies for which the Florida state government has invested in. Here's Viacom, movies and entertainment. Very important to control the entertainment and propaganda industry at $65.4 million. Now some of you might be thinking, why haven't I heard about this on the news? Surely if this was true, Glenn Beck would be talking about it. But for a $50 million contract, you'd probably sell your soul to the devil as well. Once again, when adding collective government investments into Fortune 500 companies, which includes the 5 or 6 major conglomerate media companies that own just about every major media outlet available to you, the control of information is vital in a crime such as this. Here's Visa Incorporated. We all unfortunately know what Visa is, and that appears to be a total of about $145 million. Here's Walmart Stores Incorporated. Oh, we all love the Walmart, at about $318 million. Wells Fargo, well, look at there. Florida owns a major stake in my bank. $413.4 million. Here's Yahoo! Internet software and services at $50 million. 3M, industrial conglomerates, they make just about everything involving plastic at $192.3 million. Here's American Express, another banking and finance investment at $175 million. Now, keep in mind, we've just reached page 400, and I was skipping many pages and many companies in between. And we've still got so many to go. But just to make sure that you have the full perspective of what you've just looked at here, for each individual page for which you've just looked at, there are a total of 40 investments. 40 investments times 400 pages is 16,000 different investments in just 1/5 of the Florida state CAFR. I think that you get the idea that Florida has money coming out of its butt, but it's not telling the people of Florida. Instead, it's cutting jobs, cutting public funding, and raising your taxes. On page 652, we see fixed income investments in the banking and finance industry. Here we see that the State Corporation of Florida has investments of a little less than $100 million in Goldman Sachs Group. They have about $26 million in Merrill Lynch, which I believe got sold off to Bank of America not too long ago. Again, a fire sale where assets are sold for pennies on the dollar, while liabilities are nationalized or divided amongst taxpayers. We have about $35 million in Morgan Stanley and about $35 million in Wells Fargo. On page 677, we see that Florida's combined holdings in just its SP funds are about $21 billion. Now, to give you an idea of how Florida has not put all of its eggs in one basket, let's take a look at how diversified its investments are within different industries. We have oil and gas equipment services, multi-utilities, electric utilities, investment banking and brokerage houses, land transportation, regional banks, diversified chemicals, industrial machinery, internet software and services, communications equipment, education services, pharmaceuticals, electric power and gas, electric appliances, healthcare services, food retail, and of course you can't invest in oil and gas without having some place to store and transport it. And of course before you store and transport it, you have to have oil and gas exploration and production, reinsurance as well as regular insurance, and of course household products. Now this is just the diversification of one page of all of these investments. So imagine how invested the Corporation of Florida really is. Likewise, you can't just invest in one currency. Therefore, the State Corporation of Florida has invested in many, many different countries, including Australia, Brazil, Canada, the Czech Republic, Denmark, the United States, of course, the European Union through the euro, commercial paper, which probably amounts to junk bonds, China, Hungary, Israel, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, Morocco, New Zealand, Norway, Peru, the Philippines, Poland, Singapore, South Africa, and South Korea. And of course, we can't forget the superb bankers of Switzerland, Taiwan, Thailand, Turkey, the Queen in the United Kingdom, Germany, Malaysia, Belgium, France, Portugal, Argentina, and even Jordan. And of course, if you're going to invest in a specific industry, you don't want to put all your eggs in just one company. So let's just take the healthcare and pharmaceutical industry and see who Florida has invested in. Here we have Astellas Pharmaceuticals, and of course AstraZeneca, that's a big one at $3.4 million. Abbott Laboratories, Allergan Incorporated Pharmaceuticals, Baxter International Healthcare Equipment, Bayer AG out of Germany. Now, of course, Bayer broke off from the Nazi conglomerate company IG Farben, which supported the Nazi war effort in Germany during World War II. We have BioVale Corporation of Pharmaceuticals, Beckman Coulter Healthcare Equipment, Boston Scientific Healthcare Equipment, Bristol Myers Squibb Pharmaceuticals, Brookdale Senior Living Incorporated under healthcare facilities. We could call that death care facilities, though. Cardinal Health Incorporated, a healthcare distributor, and CareFusion Corporation Healthcare Equipment. Chugai Pharmaceuticals, Signacorp Managed Healthcare, Community Health Systems Healthcare Facilities, Cooper COS Incorporated, which is healthcare supplies, Coventry Healthcare Incorporated, again managed healthcare, Danapon Sumitomo Pharmaceuticals, Daiichi Sankyo Pharmaceuticals, Endion Incorporated Healthcare Services, Aise Pharmaceuticals, and of course Eli Lilly and Company Pharmaceuticals. Now these were just the pharmaceutical and healthcare companies for the letters A through E. So what's the big deal? What's wrong with pharmaceutical and healthcare industry investments? Well, I'm glad I asked. The recently passed H.R. 3590, Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, the infamous healthcare bill that passed without our legislators even reading its thousands of pages before voting to approve it. This one bill signed by our good President Obama will guarantee that pharmaceutical and healthcare insurance corporations receive many trillions of dollars in research and development and other taxpayer grants and giveaways. Therefore, investing in these pharmaceuticals is all but a sure thing, meaning that the fund balances and returns on government pension and other funds will go up, 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 while quality of care goes down into the gutter. This is just one step away from insider trading. But I'm sure that the government won't be prosecuting its own branch government for manipulating the market that it manipulates through insane House resolutions like the Obamacare bill. These are two peas in a pod. Moving on. Interestingly, we see that the state of Florida has investments in the corporate state of Oregon. Here in cash and temporary funds, under the Dreyfus Government Cash Management Fund, in U.S. cash, the state of Florida has $2.3 million. In the Fixed Income Federal National Management Association, under agencies and other government obligations, we have about $5.1 million. And for those of you like me who always thought that scholarship funds were set up by someone who just cared about education, think again. Here we see one of the Florida State Scholarship Funds, the Agnes Peebles Scholarship Fund to be exact. Here it states the market value of stocks held in the scholarship fund. We have AT&T, Comcast, LSI Logic, Merck Pharmaceuticals, Quest, Verizon, Bell Atlantic, Vodafone, and Fairpoint Communications. I'll be told this scholarship fund has over $2 million in investments. And that is profit, which is probably never going to be seen by any student. Now, also listed on this scholarship fund is the class of stock. Notice that some is Class A stock, some is Class B stock, and some have both. Let's pause for a moment and really get a grasp on what stock actually is. Back to Wikipedia, we see that under the page named Stock, and in the subsection Shares, it states that shares represent a fraction of ownership in a business. Pretty simple. If you own stock in a business, you have partial ownership in that business. And as collective government, who has partial ownership in over 185,000 different governments, you can start to understand how much of these corporations the collective government owns. A business may declare different types or classes of shares, each having distinctive ownership rules, privileges, or share values. Under the Types of Stock section, it states, stock typically takes the form of shares of either common stock or preferred stock. As a unit of ownership, common stock typically carries voting rights that can be exercised in corporate decisions. Very important. Preferred stock differs from common stock in that it typically does not carry voting rights, but is legally entitled to receive a certain level of dividend payments before any dividends can be issued to other shareholders. Preferred stock may be hybrid by having the qualities of bonds of fixed returns and common stock voting rights, however. They also have preference in the payment of dividends over common stock and also have been given preference at the time of liquidation over common stock. Under the shareholder section, it states, a shareholder or stockholder is an individual or company, including a corporation, that legally owns one or more shares of stock in a joint stock company. Both private and public traded companies have shareholders. Companies listed at the stock market are expected to strive to enhance shareholder value. Once again, the people are left in the cold. Shareholders are granted special privileges depending on the class of stock, including the right to vote on matters such as elections to the board of directors, the right to share in distributions of company's income, the right to purchase new shares issued by the company, and the right to a company's assets during a liquidation of the company. However, shareholders' rights to a company's assets are subordinate to the rights of the company's creditors. Now, once again here, we are touching on the subject of collective government, all of the 185,000 plus different corporations acting as governments, having voting rights in all of these publicly traded and private corporations on matters related to the board of directors. What this really means is that the government, through all of its collective investment holdings through all of these governments, has proxy rights to replace the board of directors because that collective government has controlling stock in these corporations and actually place who they want into these seats as directors of the company. Therefore, the government not only has controlling interest through stock investment, Class A and B, into these companies, but collectively, government also calls the shots. And worst of all, government is the regulator of government-owned corporations. Under the section Shareholder Rights, it states that although ownership of 50% of shares does result in 50% ownership of a company, it does not give the shareholder the right to use a company's building, equipment, materials, or other property. This is because the company is considered a legal person. Once again, corporations are people too, thus it owns all its assets itself. However, in most countries, boards of directors and company managers have a fiduciary responsibility to run the company in the interests of the stockholders. If the majority stockholder in every case is collective government, and the government elects the board of directors, who then have a fiduciary responsibility to run the company in the interest of its stockholders, or the government, you see the vicious circle that is happening here. This is corporate governance. This is corporate fascism. Even though the board of directors runs the company, the shareholder has some impact on the company's policy, as the shareholders elect the board of directors. Each shareholder typically has a percentage of votes equal to the percentage of shares he or she owns. Now, one of the differences between Class A and Class B stock will be the amount of votes attached to that stock. For instance, the initial Class A stock might have 20 to 50 votes attached to it, whereas a Class B stock available on the open market might only have 1 vote. So as long as the shareholders agree that the management or agent are performing poorly, they can elect a new board of directors, which can then hire a new management team. So government, just as it didn't like Saddam Hussein, can go in and replace the CEO of the company through the board of directors by proxy vote. Board candidates are usually nominated by insiders or by the board of directors themselves, and a considerable amount of stock is held or voted by insiders. Now, after looking at just Florida's State Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, and then considering all of the other governments around the country, it's pretty obvious who has controlling stock in these corporations. Collective government. Also very interesting, on page 666, we see that the state corporation called Florida has major investments in Torrey Pines Golf Course, which is located in San Diego, California. Altogether about $12 million worth. Now, when we go to the TorreyPinesGolfCourse.com website, we read the following. The city of San Diego is the owner and operator of the Torrey Pines Golf Courses and owner of the registered mark Torrey Pines, which is used under license by Torrey Pines Club Corporation. This is a government-owned enterprise operation. Now, I don't have to tell you that if you add up these over 1,400 pages of investments, cash holdings, and other assets of the state government of Florida, the budget deficit of the entire world could probably be paid off. So the next time you hear your local politician, city council member, senator, or congressman in the state of Florida tell you that we're in a budget crisis, you call him or her out on their lie. And hey, if they say they don't know about this, then you ask them why they don't know about the general accounting system for government. That would be like a Baptist minister not knowing what the Bible is. So let's take a little trip over to the West Coast and look at the 2000 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report for the California State Teachers Retirement System. Now again, this is a government corporation, stating that CalSTRS is a component unit of the state of California. Of course, this report is only 90 pages long, as it does not list each individual investment and asset separately. So in this CAFR, we're only going to be looking at totals. We begin with the California State Teachers Retirement System combined statements of plan net assets as of June 30th, 2000. Now keep in mind that this is reported in the thousands, meaning that you must add 3 zeros to each figure presented. Now in the column marked State Teachers Retirement Plan and Assets, it states that investments at fair value for the short term equate to $1,559,699,000. Under debt securities, domestically, meaning in the United States, CalSTRS is holding $27,236,000,000, and internationally, $22,000. In equities domestically, CalSTRS is holding $46,691,549,000. In international equities, stock, and other investments, CalSTRS is holding $26,956,087,000. Alternative, I'm not sure what that refers to, 5,105,654,000. Real estate holdings equate to 3,771,458,000, and finally securities lending collateral at $16,107,099,000. So total investments equal over $127 billion. But wait, that's not the end. For CalSTRS is apparently in possession of some petty cash at $3,234,000. And in accounts receivable for the year 2000, it appears that we have $1,941,810 for investments sold. Foreign currency exchange contracts equate to $1,991,213,000. Interest and dividends that it receives from all these investments, $475,596,000. And then member and employer and other receivables at $406,698,000. And so we add total receivables of $4,815,317,000 plus another $338,000 worth of other assets for total CalSTRS assets listed at over $132 billion for the year 2000. But wait, there are some liabilities. They still owe approximately $1,116,000,000 for investments that they've purchased. And on some foreign currency exchange contracts, they still owe $1,976,000,000. They are paying a certain amount of benefits at $69,959,000. Some other liabilities at $195 million, and securities lending collateral at $16,107 million, for total liabilities of $19,464,769,000. Comparatively, net assets held in trust for pension benefits by the state corporation called CalSTRS equals $112,781,688,000. Now just look at the liabilities compared to the assets, a difference of almost $100 billion. Now, of course, you'll say, well, it's in the trust. It's all going to go to the teachers. They need that for their retirement. It's perfectly legitimate. Well, let's just take a look at what actually happens each year in this pension fund. Here it shows that total contributions from its hundreds of thousands of members equal $4,062,503,000. Now this represents the money available outside of what we just saw to pay benefits due to California retired teachers and employees. Now, under the deductions category, we see that actual benefits paid to the CalSTRS employees for retirement are as follows. Retirement, death, and survivor benefits at $3,435,268,000. Refunds of member contributions at $80 million. Purchasing power benefits at $190 million, and administrative expenses at $50,500,000, with total deductions at $3,756,292,000. Now that is what CalSTRS is paying out to its members, who are drawing from the pension fund. Which means that the CalSTRS pension fund made a $12,996,961,000 profit for the year 2000. And for 1999, an $11,596,346,000 profit. Required member and employer contribution rates are set by the teacher's retirement law. Required contribution rates are expressed as a level percentage of entry age normal actuarial cost method. The system also uses the level percentage of payroll method to calculate the amortization of any unfunded liability. A summary of statutory rates and other sources of contributions to the system is as follows. Members are forced by law to pay 8% of applicable member earnings, while employers are forced to pay 8.25% of applicable member earnings. In other words, they match employee contributions plus 0.25%. Now on page 27, under Notes to General Purpose Financial Statements, it states under Foreign Currency Exchange Contracts that the State Teacher Retirement Plan enters into forward foreign currency exchange contracts for hedging purposes to minimize the short-term impact of foreign currency fluctuations on the asset positions of foreign investments. The State Teacher's Retirement Plan could be exposed to risk if the counterparties to the contracts are unable to meet the terms of their contracts. The STRP seeks to minimize risk from counterparties by establishing minimum credit quality standards and maximum credit limits. In other words, the California State Teachers Retirement System is acting as a bank, lending and investing money into other corporate structures, both nationally and internationally. And then under the income taxes section, it states, the State Teacher Retirement Program is organized as a tax-exempt retirement plan under the IRC. The 403B program is organized as a tax-deferred supplemental program under the IRC. The system's management believes that it is operated within the constraints imposed by federal tax law. But when the law becomes lawless and not in the interest of its members or the taxpayers of the union, we have a problem. And on page 29 it states, state statutes and Teachers Retirement Board policies permit the STRP to lend its securities to broker-dealers and other entities for which collateral is received with a simultaneous agreement to return the collateral for the same securities in the future. Once again, the STRP acting as a bank. STRP has contracted with third-party securities lending agents to lend domestic and international equity and debt securities, meaning it's an international corporation. All securities loans can be terminated on demand by either STRP or the borrower. Now, to translate this gobbledygook, let's just consider the members and beneficiaries of the California State Teachers Retirement System as savings account holders. They all hold a savings account together. Now, as in your own personal savings account, the bank, or STRP, is going to give you a measly 1 to 5% return on the money you have in your collective savings account. But the bank, the STRP, is taking that money, investing it elsewhere, putting it at possibly great risk, making a 10, 20, 30% return on that investment, but never adding to the measly 3% that you get on your return for allowing the bank to risk and make a huge profit off of your savings. This has been happening for over 70 years, since before the Comprehensive Annual Financial Reporting System was even put into place. Now here's a look at just the schedule of administrative expenses for the year ended June 30th, 2000. In order to keep all of these funds, numbers, assets, and deductions straight, the California State Teachers Retirement System pays the State Street Bank administrative fees of $255,000. Chart A shows growth in total investments in millions, meaning we add 6 zeros. In 1985, the chart shows $14,208,000,000 in total investments. And as we see, the chart goes continuously up and up and up, until finally we reach the June 2000 total of $112,640,000,000. And this chart is reminiscent of most pension funds across the country. Now on page 43, Chart B shows CalSTRS returns against the actuarial rate, which is the long-term assumed rate of return. So this is just a pie chart of the growth in CalSTRS returns. But what you must understand is that proudly, these are the returns on investments above and beyond what is required to pay state employees and pensioners. This is a business, a profitable business. This graph shows the actuarial rate, meaning the stated rate of return on the money that the California state school employees need to acquire in order to have their retirement. Anything above this black line is profit. And here we see just how wonderful these guys are at investing other people's money. Over a 5-year period, we can see that the total gains, and notice there are no losses, the total gains equal 14.72% over 5 years. Now again, CalSTRS has essentially become a bank. It states the fixed income unit also manages 3 other programs: the Home Loan Program, the Currency Hedging Program, and the Securities Lending Program. So if you're a state school employee in California, your money is being lended elsewhere. Your neighbor may have bought their home with your money. Under the Home Loan Program, it states that legislation that became effective in 1999 broadened CalSTRS' ability to offer home loans with different interest rates, terms, and conditions. Once again, a sign that the regulators and legislatures work together to ensure that these type of funds can do whatever the heck they want. During the last fiscal year, CalSTRS funded more than $55 million in home loans, bringing the total since organization in 1986 to nearly $3 billion. So apparently, CalSTRS wants to keep expanding its usurious loan program. Under the Currency Hedging Program, it states that CalSTRS currently hedges a portion of its international stock exposure in order to protect these assets against a strengthening US dollar in both Asia and Europe. It also states that this Currency Hedging Program has been successful in adding value as a result of its prudent use of basic hedging principles and the strength of the US dollar overseas. To date, the Currency Hedging Program has generated more than $450 million in additional income to the fund. Simply stated, this means betting on one currency against another. And my guess would be that these and other funds and government corporations probably know in advance which currencies will get higher and lower, because these government-controlled corporations are the world economy. So naturally, in a huge conflict of interest, they know what's going to happen to the market in the future. And under the Securities Lending Program, it states CalSTRS has been lending securities since 1988, and that this represents CalSTRS' first and longest-running off-balance sheet program. Over the last fiscal year, CalSTRS has earned more than $55 million from this activity. Since inception, the program has earned approximately $350 million. Chart D lists U.S. Treasury bonds that it has purchased at an interest rate of 8.88% with a market value of $809 million. So that means that in 2017, when these U.S. Treasury bonds mature, the fund will receive a gain on its investment into the U.S. Treasury bonds of $103.7 million. Other funds, which mature in 2020, 2019, 2018, amount to hundreds of millions in unrealized gains. It's also invested in the Federal Home Loan Mortgage Corporation with a market value of $451.9 million, which just matured last year. It's also invested in the Tennessee Valley Authority, for a market share of $384.4 million. And now we get to perhaps the most important part of this whole presentation. For if you comprehend the following, you will finally understand what corporate governments and government-owned corporations really are. Here on Chart E, CalSTRS lists its largest equity holdings as of June 30th, 2000, and it states that just in General Electric stock alone, it holds 28,948,341 shares of General Electric stock, with a market value of $1,534,262,073. That, my friends, is a major market share of General Electric stock. And once again, we must remember that this is just one of over 185,000 different governments in the United States. It also lists Intel Corp with 9.9 million shares, Cisco Systems at 20.5 million shares, Microsoft Corporation at 15.7 million shares, Pfizer Pharmaceuticals Incorporated at 18.6 million shares, ExxonMobil Corporation at 10 million shares, Walmart Stores at 12.8 million shares, Oracle Corporation at 8.6 million shares, Nortel Networks Corporation at 9.2 million shares, and Vodafone AirTouch at 147.8 million shares. And these are just the largest of the stock holdings within CalSTRS. Walter Burian of CalFor1.com has estimated that government ownership of just Microsoft Corporation stock is at approximately 83%, with the 5 boroughs of New York City proper owning collectively about 5% of that company. This means that everything that you do on your computer and everything that is included in your end-user agreement belongs to the government. And the government is the one regulating the internet. It's also the one regulating advertising, usury, and fraud laws. The conflicts of interest here are astounding. Because remember, the Central Intelligence Agency and the National Security Agency are private government offices with access to everything that you do on the internet and through Microsoft. And Apple computers are also government-owned. Now, understanding that, we go to page 46, where CalSTRS actually devoted a paragraph to corporate governance. Now, if you still don't comprehend what a proxy vote means, this is an admission of guilt. It states, during the 1999-2000 fiscal year, CalSTRS voted on a variety of proxy issues including financial, corporate governance, and social issues. There were 7,192 votes cast on proxy issues of corporations whose shares were owned in the investment portfolio. These proxy issues were presented on 2,789 companies. The overall number of proxy issues increased from 6,588 last year, but the number of mergers and acquisitions reviewed remained constant, at a little more than 10%. Merger activity, both within United States borders and across the borders, continued its steady course, especially in those transactions where stock is the compensation received by the acquired company's holders. This reflects the continued appreciation in the stock market both at home and abroad. So this government corporation, one of over 185,000 within the United States, just told us that it voted on a variety of proxy issues including financial, corporate governance, and social issues, with 7,192 votes cast on proxy issues of corporations whose shares were owned in their investment portfolio. In other words, CalSTRS is acting as a major shareholder, voting as partial owners of these corporations, on issues that dictate the future success of those corporations. This is corporate governance, in the words of the United States government. This is perhaps the most important, revealing paragraph you will ever read in your lifetime. This is fascism. Then, on page 47, CalSTRS states that by proxy, the major issues voted on are summarized below. And once again, this is criminal activity. And by this point, surely you realize the Constitution is out the window. Number 1, election of directors. CalSTRS generally votes in favor of directors unless the proxy statement shows circumstances contrary to policy. The selection of auditors and accountants. CalSTRS generally votes in favor on the independent auditors and accountants recommended by management. And for its employees, under compensation plans, stock options, incentive stock options, employee stock purchase plans, etc. Corporations provide a variety of compensation plans to keep executives, employees, and non-employee directors. A number of these plans provide for the issuance of long-term incentives to attract, reward, and retain key employees, the best of the criminals, and other miscellaneous management. CalSTRS generally votes in favor of other miscellaneous business recommended by management, but issues are decided on a case-by-case basis. Now, the word management here, when it's recommended by management, simply means that the government, as a collective whole, wants CalSTRS to vote a certain way with regards to its ownership stock holdings in these corporations. Also, in voting to approve merger acquisition management, CalSTRS generally votes in favor of the acquisition or merger of one company into another. This means that the pension fund for California state teachers has a say in whether the companies it owns stock in can merge with one another. Number 5 is corporate actions and corporate governance issues. These are issues related to mergers, acquisitions, stock issuance, stock splits, and incorporation. CalSTRS generally votes in favor of these proposals unless there is a compelling reason not to cast a positive vote. Once again, CalSTRS is deciding on mergers, acquisitions, stock issuance, in other words, who gets the stock, and stock splits, which can only serve to benefit CalSTRS. The government is the corporations. The corporations are the government. There is no fine line. That line has been erased. Erased just like our borders and just like our Constitution. Back to page 45, under real estate, it states that over the last fiscal year, CalSTRS' portfolio of real estate assets reached $3.8 billion. 82 directly owned properties and 3 privately owned partnerships represented this dollar amount. Real estate represents nearly 3% of the total portfolio. The direct property portfolio is diversified as a property type and geographic location. The largest component of the direct property sector is office. As is true last year, the largest weighting is in the western region of the United States. The CalSTRS real estate portfolio has achieved annual returns of 9, 17, and 14% for the 1, 3, and 5-year periods, respectively. And remember, all of this is happening tax-free. These corporations are exempt from any taxes. On page 46, we have Chart F, which is the investment summary for the year ended June 30th, 2000, again in millions, which shows the net assets and investments. Now, Chart G shows the schedule of fees for July 1, 1999 through June 30th of 2000, and it's listed in thousands. So we can see here where a lot of this profit is going. For just the domestic equity holdings, stock and everything else, CalSTRS is paying $10,261,000 to its equity managers. For international equities, it's paying $31,673,000 to managers. Alternative investments, $1 million, and real estate, $12.8 million, for total investment managers' fees of $55 million. This is ridiculous. $55.94 million in fees. This is corruption at its finest, aged for a very long time until perfectly corrupt. Here's Chart H listing broker commissions for the one-year period ending June 30th, 2000. Just for domestic commissions for the brokers that handle these equities, CalSTRS is paying $4.8 million. Just for domestic equities. For international commissions, it's paying almost $11 million. If only this money were being used to benefit the public, or at least the school employees of California. Now, when it comes down to determining the bottom line on what these pension funds will pay out to their members, it is an exact science. This sounds more like we're talking about cattle than people. Between the contributions from its members and the rate of return from just those contributions when invested in the markets, the full amount of money paid to beneficiaries of the CalSTRS pension fund are completely paid. So all of the other net assets held in trust for pension benefits, which in 2000 equated to $112,781,688,000, can be used for something other than paying school employees. In other words, everything that this fund does from the year 2000 on is pure speculation and profit, because the amount of money that is being put into this pension fund by school employees who are mandated by law to contribute to this fund is enough money to pay all retirement benefits for qualified and retired California state teachers. Now just imagine if these people who are working with these funds, investing in and controlling the market, were actually using that money for the good of the taxpayers, for the good of the economy, and to the benefit of humanity. This is exactly what Walter Burien of CAFR1.com would like to see happen. His life dream is simply to see this rightfully taxpayer money be put to use to benefit the taxpayers of America. His tax retirement funds would reacquire this massive store of wealth, get rid of the corruption controlling it through complete transparency, and use that money for the benefit of the people, the states, and the country. Imagine a government actually funding alternative energy solutions that aren't from corporations. Imagine alleviating all federal, state, and local taxes simply by using this government store of investment income to pay all of the taxes that we are forced to pay by law. Imagine freedom without eminent domain and other federal tyrannies to get in the way of true land and home ownership. Imagine a government that actually rewards its legislators for fiscal responsibility instead of theft by deception and usury, for saving money instead of forcibly spending and wasting it to ensure larger budgets for the next quarter. Imagine a work environment where honesty and integrity are the most sought-after qualities for employees, where lying, cheating, and stealing are not rewarded, but instead looked down upon. Imagine actually trusting your politicians without doubt, simply because everything they do is scrutinized and transparent by law, and they know they will lose their position of authority the second they cheat, lie, or steal. Imagine having a recourse against police brutality, this most violent street gang in America, and actually hiring good and honest, constitutionally minded men and women to protect and serve the people against government and corporate tyranny, not to protect the crimes, taxes, and fines imposed by corporations and municipalities. And then imagine bringing judges, lawyers, attorneys, and politicians to justice by grand jury indictments for criminal behavior in an official capacity. Imagine a government that invests in research and development for the actual cures for cancer and other diseases, as opposed to turning cancer into the most profitable business in the medical field by prescribing cancer-causing radiation and chemotherapy by force, while outlawing natural cures and preventative research and products. Imagine building a better widget and actually being able to compete in the global market, without corporations squashing the most brilliant of ideas simply because they aren't profitable or patentable, or because they might make outdated and polluting corporate standards like oil, coal, or AC/DC electricity less in demand. And imagine no property tax, no sales tax, no estate or death tax. And once again, imagine no taxation without representation. All of this is possible by simply setting up a tax retirement fund in any city, county, township, state, even federal government. Taxation is not needed, as you can see from all of these funds. Walter Burien has estimated that just in pension funds alone across the country, there is approximately $36 trillion worth of investments. Now, we're throwing around some pretty big numbers here. Most people can't even imagine what $1 million looks like, let alone $1 billion or $1 trillion. But to give you an idea of what $1 trillion is, try to imagine $1 million and then multiply that by another million. $1 trillion is a million. And that means that just in pension funds alone across the United States, there are $36 million in assets and investments. This is theft and tyranny. And the craziest part about it is that it is hidden in plain sight. But no longer. For here in front of you is the proof that our government is not only a for-profit, major conglomerate world corporation, but that it has been stealing and investing taxpayer money against the will of the people, with little to no disclosure about that stolen money through collective government investments. I, for one, wholeheartedly support Walter Burien in his efforts, and hope that you too can see the benefit of what he is trying to do for you and your family's future. If we do not do something about this, and soon, the whole world is going to be gobbled up by these corporations, and the people will continue to suffer, to lose their jobs, to lose their homes, and to lose all prosperity, life, liberty, and the happiness that this country was founded on. Now, let's take a look at the CalSTRS Comprehensive Annual Financial Report for June 30th of 2009. This year's theme is transparency. but I think they're being a little bit too transparent for this type of criminal activity. On the introduction page, it lists the usual words of encouragement from the head crook. And in this introduction is the section called Transparency and Governance. It states, "We believe there is a universal standard for good corporate governance. It includes transparency and disclosure of broad activities and engaging companies to help maximize their performance, a best practice that we've followed for years. Once again, an admission of corporatism and fascism. Good corporate governance is an important factor in maintaining the long-term value of CalSTRS portfolio companies, and we intend to protect that value for the benefit of California's educators. Yeah. Our corporate governance policies address leading issues such as proxy access. As a long-term owner and lender to corporations around the world, CalSTRS' duty is to protect these assets through the pursuit of good governance and operational accountability. Again, an admission of guilt. This is a pension fund acting as government for corporations. Information is vital for shareholders to make informed decisions about the companies they own, and CalSTRS intends to let fellow shareholders as well as management, government, know how we intend to vote. And as we see, the net assets held in trust for pension and other post-employment benefits at the end of business year 2009 was $118,430,073,000. Once again, reported in thousands, meaning we add 3 zeros. At the beginning of the year, it was $161 billion, and we can see that CalSTRS is reporting a negative year in the amount of $43,068,120,000. But what is absolutely necessary to comprehend in the case of figures like this is that these monetary values are not what you should be looking at. Stocks and the market that they represent will always go up and down. As you can see by CalSTRS Table 1, growth in total investments listed in millions. Here is the year 2000, as we just covered, at $112 billion. And you'll notice that it went up to $171,899,000,000. And with the economic instability and crises of 2008 and 2009, we're back down to $118,875,000,000. Now again, the monetary value here is not what you should be paying attention to, for it is not the sparkly things that hold the value. The real value of CalSTRS' stock portfolio is its percentage of ownership in these companies, for percentage of ownership equals percentage of proxy voting rights. And as we can see in Table 5, listed as the largest equity holdings as of June 30th, 2009, we see that CalSTRS held on to its General Electric stock. But as of 2009, it's gone up to 40,838,000 shares of General Electric stock. That represents a significant change of ownership within General Electric by the CalSTRS pension fund. Its ownership in General Electric stock has gone up by 75% in 9 years. Which means that its ownership of General Electric and the votes it casts on behalf of General Electric have also gone up by 75%. We can also see that its ownership in ExxonMobil Corporation has increased by more than 8 million shares in the last 9 years, representing about an 80% increase in ownership of Exxon. Microsoft Corporation stock has doubled from 15 million shares in 2000 to 30 million shares in 2009. And now, topping the list of stock investments, we have Johnson & Johnson at 10.6 million shares, AT&T Incorporated at 23.399 million shares, International Business Machines at 5.3 million shares, Procter & Gamble at 10.6 million shares, Chevron Corporation at 8 million shares, J.P. Morgan Chase & Company, 15 million shares, and Apple Incorporated at about 3.5 million shares. More proof that Apple is equally as controlled as Microsoft when it comes to corporate governance. And again on page 74, CalSTRS dedicates a page to its corporate governance. This year, CalSTRS staff voted on 61 1,950 proxy proposals submitted by 4,087 corporations that are held in the CalSTRS portfolio. And this 61,950 proposals represented a 30.5% increase from the 47,481 proposals voted on in 2007 and 2008. And it shows that the major proxy issues voted on are summarized below, which are election of directors, selection of auditors, mergers and acquisitions, corporate actions and corporate governance issues, and other miscellaneous issues. On page 50, CalSTRS lists its foreign currency risk. Listed in thousands, we see where CalSTRS is hedging its American dollars. Australia, Brazil, England, Canada, Chile, Colombia, the Czech Republic, Egypt, the European Union, Japan, China, India, and on, for a total of $22,273,247,000. This represents the securities purchased in a foreign country. Again, CalSTRS continues its banking practices. It states that the investment figures are comprised of numerous portfolios within the international equity, debt securities, private equity, and real estate investment line items on the Statement of Fiduciary Net Assets. And of course, CalSTRS is still paying its investment managers fees to the tune of $124,414,000. And we can't forget its global equity broker commissions, for a total of $44,598,000. Once again, the monetary value of this fund is not what you should be looking at. The ownership in Fortune 500 and other corporations is what is important here. The stock market can go up and down as much as it wants, because when it's down, they'll buy more stock. When it's up, they'll either hold on to it or sell it, knowing that it will go back down at a later date, and then CalSTRS can purchase more ownership stock in these corporations. This is the monetary shell game played by collective government. And for a final understanding of how much money is out there in this collective government, let's just take a look at a few more governments and municipalities from around the country. Let's start with my hometown and the capital of California, Sacramento. In its 2009 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, under the Management's Discussion and Analysis, it states under the Financial Highlights section that the city's total government-wide net assets, excluding discretely presented component units, increased $41.1 million to $2.5 billion in 2009, an increase of 1.7% over 2008. And under the financial analysis of the government-wide statements, it states that total assets, listed in millions, for 2009 total $3,845,000,000, slightly up from 2008. Listing its total liabilities at $1.3 billion, we have total net assets at $2,518,000,000 for the city of Sacramento. And that's important, because this is only the city government or municipality of Sacramento, and its summary of net assets. But what about the county of Sacramento? Again, the county of Sacramento is a totally different government. And within its comprehensive annual financial report for the year 2009, again under the Financial Highlights section, it states that the assets of the county exceeded liabilities at the close of the 2008-2009 fiscal year by $2,547,254. And under its statement of net assets for the year ended June 30th, 2009, expressed in thousands of dollars, we see the total for liabilities and net assets equals in the positive, meaning its assets outweigh its liabilities, by $6,712,350,000. So Sacramento County ain't doing so bad. But the biggest mistake one can make when examining these financial statements is to look at this first section, the stated net assets. It's as if it is there to throw you off the scent. For the real assets of each of these corporate governments is always hidden further down within the last of the 1 to 300 pages of the CAFR. In those required pages are listed the many types of funds and off-balance sheet operations and business that each government is involved in. Generally speaking, the majority of the wealth of America is tied up in these funds, especially the state and local pension funds. Many funds are cleverly portrayed as future planning for such things as roads, bridges, construction, etc. But each of these funds has their own investments, and as the fund grows by return on those investments or from interest earnings, this extra money is kept within the fund. It is often moved into other funds and reinvested there, or may be loaned out or allocated to other government debts or functions. So a fund may be set up with the expectation to grow into $1 billion at the end of 20 years, assigned enough taxpayer money through taxation to eventually reach that goal. But at the end of that 20 years, or sooner, regardless of need or of the taxpayer's will, there is no contract requiring that fund to be used for its originally intended purpose, and it is often reabsorbed into the government or other funds and investments. Or, the principal balance of that fund will be used for the required road, bridge, or other project, but all of the profit from that investment fund goes elsewhere. There are multiple types of these funds for each incorporated state, district, county, city, local, and other types of governments. Sacramento County is, of course, invested in the California Public Employees Retirement System, or CalPERS. And the more government employees, the better for the fund, since each employee enrolled in this pension fund for state workers requires by law that their state employers contribute to the fund as well. Of course, that is taxpayer money that is being contributed on behalf of these state employees, since taxpayer money funds these government offices. Thus, the intent and motive for the creation of government jobs and the hiring and firing of state employees is based more on profit for the state and local pension funds, way more than it is for just government-related business need. So let's take a look at the CalPERS CAFR. As we examine this financial report, we again get a look into the vast amounts of wealth that California holds in its pension funds. Dwarfing the California State Teachers Retirement Pension Fund, the CalPERS Summary of Investments for its Public Employee Retirement Fund shows a total investment value of $197,102,773,341. It also shows real estate investments at almost $20 billion. Now on page 93 of 198 pages, CalPERS makes a very lame attempt at trying to show that it reinvests in the state of California, with California investments totaling $14,877,000,000. However, in this almost $200 billion fund, it's fairly obvious that CalPERS is invested in Fortune 500 and foreign corporations. And here again we have the largest stock holdings for CalPERS, and it appears to be the usual suspects with stock investments in ExxonMobil Corporation at 14.2 million shares, Microsoft Corporation at 23.1 million shares, Johnson & Johnson at 7.6 million shares, AT&T at 17 million shares, Procter & Gamble Company at 8 million shares, International Business Machines at 3.9 million shares, Chevron Corporation at 6.1 million shares, J.P. Morgan Chase Company at 11.1 million shares, Apple Computers, once again at 2.5 million shares, and Walmart rounds out the top 10 at 7.2 million shares. It also lists its largest bond holdings, listed in thousands and showing billions and billions of dollars worth of bond holdings. And it seems like everybody's invested in the Tennessee Valley Authority. And interestingly, and what seems to me a bit of a conflict of interest, is that it's having J.P. Morgan Securities as one of its larger brokers. I find it hard to believe that there is not some conflict of interest in having major stock holdings in the company that is your broker. And we see that the total commission and broker fees for the pension fund is $84,418,000. And at the end of it all, we see that net assets held in trust for pension and other post-employment benefits equals $178,899,883,000, plus a little over $1 billion in other California funds. And now you understand where a lot of this government money is being hidden, within the pension and other funds. Here's the Ohio State Teachers CAFR. And once again, similar to CalSTRS, though on a lesser scale, we see that net assets held in trust for pensions and other post-employment benefits are at $8,024,889,206. Now, this documentary wouldn't be complete if I didn't include the Salt Lake City Corporation, would it? According to Salt Lake City Corporation's Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, year ending June 30th, 2009, under its Financial Highlights section, it states that the assets of Salt Lake City, the city, exceeded its liabilities at the end of the current fiscal year by $2,116,861,947. Of this amount, nearly $479 million are unrestricted net assets and available to meet ongoing obligations to citizens and creditors. Net assets for year 2009 increased by $65.9 million. It also states that the city's governmental funds reported combined ending fund balance of $119.2 million, an increase of $28.7 million compared to the prior year's ending amount. Of the combined total fund balance, almost $44 million is available for spending at the discretion of the city, unreserved and undesignated fund balance. Here we see just how much the city receives in property taxes at $66,608,000. Other taxes it receives at $75,650,000. And the total liabilities and net assets equate to $2,589,079,000. It even lists its component library unit at a value of $34,377,000. And finally we come to the revenue section. General property taxes at $66 million, interest it receives from investments at $2.3 million, and the personal thorn in my side, parking tickets at $3,969,193. Licenses, permits, fines and forfeitures, assessments, interest, intergovernmental, parking meters, charges for services, contributions, sales use and excise taxes, franchise taxes. These serve to benefit no one, and the total revenues collected from the people of the municipality or corporation of Salt Lake City equate to $191 million just in fines and fees. Again, we see corruption at its finest. And we see that the fund balance, which represents all of these fees and other usurious activities, is in the black at $24,258,000. Meanwhile, unemployment is on the rise, vacant housing and strip malls have become commonplace, and property and other taxes are continuously being raised. Now again, we just made the mistake of taking this statement of net assets as the total government assets, without taking into consideration the enterprise operations, operating investment funds, and pension funds listed towards the end of the report. Now in the Salt Lake CAFR, it states that the city participates in 3 cost-sharing multiple employer public retirement systems, PERS, PERS, and 1 multiple employer agent PERS. And it references the Public Safety Retirement System, and it goes into the actuarial rates and asset values. So let's take a look at Utah Retirement Systems, a component unit of the state of Utah. Their comprehensive annual financial report includes the non-contributory retirement system, contributory retirement system, public safety retirement system, firefighters retirement system, judges retirement system, governors and legislators retirement plan, 401k and 457 plans, Roth and traditional IRA plans, and health reimbursement arrangement, or HRA. It states that the fair value of assets as of January 1, 2009 was $15,886,000 and grew by almost $2 billion to a fair market value of $17,717,000 as of December 31, 2009. Also, it states the actuarial value of these assets, which are available for benefits, is at $20,818,000. Once again, we get into our corporate governance section, and the state pension fund has its list of largest assets held. ExxonMobil, Apple, JP Morgan Chase, Microsoft, Google, Hewlett-Packard, Cisco Systems, Pfizer, Wells Fargo, and AT&T. Once again, this represents ownership in all of these companies, and these are just the top 10. And once again, we see the conflict of interest by having JP Morgan Chase as a broker, and we see that the total of fees and commissions paid for this particular fund was $4,367,000. Now, in its other fund, again, we have a different list of largest assets held, and we see that it includes the same stocks, with Apple Computers, Google, Microsoft Corporation, Hewlett-Packard, Cisco Systems, Qualcomm, JP Morgan Chase, ExxonMobil, Visa, and Schlumberger Limited, and lots of money invested in debt securities. And so once again, we can see where the state of Utah, the city of Salt Lake, and the county of Salt Lake are stashing and investing their money. Now, there is one final curtain that needs to be unveiled here. The Federal Reserve has been a hot topic of conversation among those in the truth and freedom movements. And leading the pack with his winning smile and stoic persona is the lovable congressman by the name of Ron Paul. Mr. Paul is the leading advocate of not only ending the central bank in the form of the Federal Reserve, but also of auditing this horrendous bank as well. But audit is an interesting choice of words to use for his cause, since Ron Paul is fully aware that the Federal Reserve is obligated under federal law to submit a comprehensive annual financial report to the federal government. While I respect and admire Congressman Paul, sadly, as a congressman, he is equally complicit in the cover-up of these financial audits in the form of CAFRs. The Comprehensive Annual Financial Report is the audit of the Federal Reserve, and he knows this. But to his credit, he also knows that it is literally political suicide to talk openly about the CAFRs in any public forum, even in congressional session. He has a family, and he knows they would be in danger if he went too far on this subject. Does this make Mr. Paul a bad guy? Well, I'm not a judge. That is for the individual to decide. For on one side, he has his well-being and family to protect. He also, however, as all legislators do, has a multi-million-dollar discretionary tax-exempt expense account to protect. While I'll give him the benefit of the doubt that his silence on this subject is purely political and protectionary, not wanting to lose his political gain in an otherwise good old boy government, I now challenge Ron Paul to come clean. with this documentary as his tool, and once and for all to prove his loyalty is first to the people for which he represents, and not to the continuity of the corporate government. And now, my gift to you, Dr. Paul, my hero, pending your action and public discourse on the matters discussed herein. Let's take a look at the audit of the Federal Reserve Bank through its comprehensive annual financial report. First, in order to provide proof that Ron Paul is telling the truth about the Fed, I found this to be a very telling piece of evidence. This is a clipping from a federal case involving Lewis versus the United States, cited as 680 F2D 1239 from the year 1982, and it refers to federal tort claims involving the Federal Reserve. Here it states that the Court of Appeals held that the Federal Reserve banks are not federal instrumentalities for purposes of the Act, but are independent, privately owned, and locally controlled corporations. As far as determining what is a federal agency, the critical factor is the existence of federal government control over detailed physical performance and the day-to-day operation of an entity. Again, it states Federal Reserve banks are not federal instrumentalities for the purposes of federal torts claims, but are independent, privately owned, and locally controlled corporations. It also states that Federal Reserve banks receive no appropriated funds from Congress, and the banks are empowered to sue and be sued in their own names. Here it states each bank is statutorily empowered to conduct these activities without day-to-day direction from the federal government. So the Federal Reserve is acting completely independent from the federal government. The interest rates on advances to member banks, individual partnerships, and corporations are set by each reserve, and their decisions regarding the purchase and sale of securities are likewise independently made. Now remember, this is the bank, the private international bank, that your federal income tax is going so that it can print our money. It also states in the past the banks have defended against tort claims directly through private counsel, not government attorneys. But we also mustn't forget that the reserve banks, which further the nation's fiscal policy, clearly perform an important governmental function. This is the bank that makes the economy go up and down whenever it wants. I guess that's important. And finally, it states that plaintiffs are not without a forum in which to seek a remedy, for they may bring an appropriate state tort claim directly against the bank. And if successful, their prospects of recovery are bright, since the institutions are both highly solvent and amply insured. Well, I wanted to know how highly solvent these banks really were. And so I pulled up the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report for the Federal Reserve 2008. Now, this is a very long report, and so we're just going to go through a few key pages on the report. Here, in a letter to the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Mr. Ben Bernanke, the President of the Federal Reserve, states that pursuant to the requirements of Section 10 of the Federal Reserve Act, I am pleased to submit the 99th Annual Report of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. This report covers operations of the board during calendar year 2008. Now, moving to page 416, under the Statement of Condition of the Federal Reserve Banks by bank, and listed in millions of dollars, as of December 31st, 2009, the accumulative holdings in the Federal Reserve's gold certificate account was $11,037 million worth of gold. Now, do you really want to go to the gold standard? You can see here who has control of gold: government and its corporations. And a little farther down the page, we see that the Federal Reserve has total assets of $2,248,534 million. And then just a little farther down, we get to the gold mine. This is what everyone talks about. Under payments to U.S. Treasury, described as interest on Federal Reserve notes, we have the total for all banks at $31,688,000,000 in interest on the dollar on Federal Reserve notes. That is a very significant part of the national debt. This is interest on the dollar that the U.S. government owes a private institution, a private international corporation, for the use of its paper, something that the U.S. government could do itself without interest of any kind. This is the very definition of usury. Absolutely unnecessary and corrupt. And at the bottom it shows that the Federal Reserve has a surplus as of December 31st of $21,075,000,000, which is up from the beginning of the year by about $2.5 billion. That's a heck of a profit. On page 445, it has the number and annual salaries of officers and employees of the Federal Reserve banks. And in the totals section for just the New York Federal Reserve Bank, these boys are getting paid $293,025,032, with the total annual salaries of officers and employees of the Federal Reserve banks at $1,383,973,408. Funny, that's about what David Walker said that the deficit of the federal government is.
We had a $1.4 trillion deficit last year. We expect to have about a $1.4 billion deficit this year.
I think we just found a cure for our wounded federal government. Now, as we know, Timothy Geithner quit the Federal Reserve Bank to take an appointment by President Obama as the Treasury Secretary. Here is his severance pay. It states that in January 2009, the Board of Governors, at the request of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York's Board of Directors, approved a special separation payment of $434,686 to Bank President Timothy Geithner. And on January 1 of each year, all presidents receive salary increases equal to the percentage increase in the midpoint of their respective salary ranges. Wow. And once again, we see that Deloitte and Touche is the independent auditor chosen by the Board of Governors for the Federal Reserve. And here it states the financial statements of the Board of Governors for 2008 and 2007 were audited, an audit of the Federal Reserve by Deloitte and Touche, independent auditors. And finally, we get to page 486, where it refers to the Government Accountability Office reviews. Where have we heard that office before? David Walker, the Auditor General of the United States, of course. You see, it turns out that under the Federal Banking Agency Audit Act, Public Law 95-320, most Federal Reserve System operations are under the purview of the Government Accountability Office, or GAO. The reports are available directly from the GAO. So there you go, Ron Paul. Why don't you just go to the Comptroller General of the United States and just grab the reports from him? There's your audit of the Federal Reserve. Now get on it, man. So if you really want an audit of the Federal Reserve, here's the man to talk to. He knew what was going on the whole time he was in office, because the Federal Reserve and other branches of the federal government have to go through this man and get those audits approved by the Government Accounting Office that he represented. All the secrets of the Federal Reserve are within this man's corrupt head. Now, in the interest of time, this brings me to the end of my presentation. So what is the solution here? Well, corporations are people too, but they're not real people. They are fictional persons. They are straw men. They are not real. And corporations can be dissolved. They are not your government, though they like to think they are. A republic government is a group of representative officials, and you do not have that. And you do not have a constitution to protect you. Now, on that note, the comprehensive annual financial reports that I've been referencing were from 2009, most of them ending June 30. But the stock market has gone up by almost 3,000 points since then, which would represent about a 40% increase at least in the value of the stocks held in these funds and government accounts. The 2010 Comprehensive Annual Financial Reports are due out at any time, and I would invite you to examine them yourselves and to see the astronomical gains that government has probably gained in the last year. What we've talked about here is corporate fascism, admitted in the financial reports of the federal and local, state, county, and other corporate governance across the United States. We have a problem. We cannot change this corrupt system of corporate fascism from within the current corporate structure of government. Washington, D.C. is its own country. It is a foreign corporation that is not part of the 50 states united. This is the best kept secret of our time. We cannot trust in the two-party system of government. This is not a question of voting them out, perpetually changing between the two dominant political parties. The definition of insane is indeed to repeat the same action over and over, electing the same media-driven candidates, the media being owned by government, and insanely expecting different results. This is a different kind of lesson that we all must learn, perhaps the hardest medicine of our lives. For we, the people of the United States of America, are no longer governed by the Constitution for the United States of America, nor are our politicians bound in any way by its republic form of governance. In fact, some corporate cities and townships are now passing laws which blatantly state that their elected and appointed officials are not bound by any oath that they take. Tremont, Utah, near me, to name just one. If you are part of an activist group such as We Are Change, End the Fed, the Tea Party, or any other group out there, you must understand that this is truly the only issue that is viable in the fight to take our country back. This is the holy grail of information. This must be comprehended in order to understand why things like 9/11, the Federal Reserve's powers, and political parties and lobbies have a tyrannical grasp on all of us. You cannot fight against a well-oiled corporate machine unless you understand the machine before you plan your battle. You must release your hope that the Obama administration or any future corporate officer and CEO of the United States will change this system of corporate fascism in America. You must release your media-driven beliefs, which have no foundation in fact, beliefs that blind you from reality with public opinion spun out of control by the corporate government-controlled network of propaganda and lies. And you must release your faith that government is good most of the time, that government has the best interest of the people at heart, that elected but mostly unelected and appointed corporate officials aren't involved in a long-term plan to rob you and your future generations land, wealth, and prosperity. For a corporation has but one purpose, and one purpose only, to ensure profit for its stockholders, and that is not we the people. There is but one viable solution that I have seen for this corporate takeover of our homeland and the world around us. That solution comes from a man named Walter Burien, and he calls it a tax retirement fund. Walter has been instrumental in the fight to bring awareness of not only the corporate structure of government to the attention of the masses, but to expose this truth with their own comprehensive annual financial reports. No matter who you are, no matter what your job is, what social class you fall under, or what political affiliation you think of yourself as. All of this doesn't matter anymore. Your reality, your paradigm must change now, with the information you now hold. You must break free of political parties, break free of the clever hope and change mantra and political rhetoric, and you must break free of the fear and entertainment that is constantly shrouded over you to keep you dumbed down to the truth. Turn your television off. Get mad as hell and yell from your window that you are not going to take it anymore. Please get in touch with Walter Burian at CAFR1.com, where he will receive your calls and instruct you on how you can utilize his knowledge to bring his tax retirement fund solution to a public vote in your local government, with citizens voting to bring all of these investments back into the public's hands to fund the future of your city or county, state or township, while forcing a complete open book audit of every financial transaction in your corporate venue. Only we, as people united in the pursuit of freedom, can restructure and reinvent our government, placing it back into the constitutional realm of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness without taxation of any kind. This is our last hope. Please join me in supporting Walter Burian and CAFR1.com and bringing tax retirement funds to your local, county, and state governments. Please, please make this video go viral.
America needs a full-time president. And a full-time Congress.
Intends to remain the master of its own house.
Well, he failed. Leave Iraq or be driven out, failed. The Middle East, the Baghdad, failed. And he came back from Baghdad with no progress at all. Failed. To reach a peaceful resolution. Withdraw from Iraq. Withdraw from Iraq.
To restore pride at home.
Withdraw from Iraq. Withdraw from Iraq.
And respect abroad.
Withdraw from Iraq. The Middle East. The Baghdad. The Middle East. The Baghdad. The Middle East. The Baghdad. The Baghdad. When we invaded the Middle East, Iraq, a member of the Arab League, a member of the United Nations, was crushed. Its people brutalized. War. We subjected the people to unspeakable atrocities. War. And among those maimed and murdered, innocent children. War. Move out of Iraq in accord with the United Nations resolutions. War. The answer is clear. War. Move out of Iraq. War.
Hanging by the slenderest of threads, capable of being cut at any moment by accident or miscalculation or by madness. The weapons of war must be abolished before they abolish us.